Hi guys, this video is going to be about the best available virtual instruments in 2024, and I'm talking about virtual guitars and basses. Just to be clear, if some part of these instruments have some sort of strummer, player, chord packs or whatever, I'm not talking about that part at all. I'm just talking about real-time playable instruments and what controller is best to use with those. First of all, let's acknowledge one basic fact. Guitars and string instruments are polyphonic bend instruments. I can't really play a note without bending it a little. If I want to have this quality translate into any recording, I need something like an MPE controller, because the old MIDI controllers really don't cut it here. So I'm also going to talk about what kind of MPE controller is best to use when inputting guitar. If I'm a piano player, I'm more likely to use something like the Osmos or the Roli Seaboard, since it's at least a keyboard of some sort. Personally, I really liked the Sensel Morph. It's kind of a clean slate and you can decide exactly how you want it to work. It has this really precise pressure sensitivity, and you could use all 10 fingers for the same note and microtonally change stuff up. I've set it up so that wherever I press in this first space, I'm going to get a C note. For the next space, I will get the E note and G note, of course. With this Sensel Morph, I can do microtonal tone smears that are impossible to do with any of my other MPE controllers, like my Roli Seaboard or my MIDI guitar. So that would be what I would use the Sensel Morph for. But if I, on the other hand, want to use my Roli Seaboard, I have great control over other parameters or other kinds of gestures. Stuff like vibrato. If I'm going to try to emulate a guitar and use a Roli Seaboard, fine. Some vibratos are perfectly okay to use, but this is not the perfect instrument if I want to play an acoustic guitar. It's perfect for other stuff. I've used the Roli Seaboard in other contexts with its great expressivity, and I got some great results from it. So what I'm trying to say here is really, there isn't any one MPE controller that is best at everything. MPE is a technology that has come along to help us with the stuff that we couldn't do with MIDI controllers. So we have traditional MIDI controllers, but they don't do stuff like polyphonic bends. The question becomes, what MPE controller are we going to use if we want to input stuff like guitars? And lo and behold, my argument is that the best MPE controller to input guitars are guitars. For me, there's no competition. I can't handle any other MPE controller in the way that I can handle guitar together with Jamordian software. So for me, it's not a question of is this better or worse than anything. Everything else is a coping mechanism, but I really enjoy working with guitar and whatever instrument I put as an extension to that now. Your guitar together with Jamordian software is the perfect MPE controller or MIDI controller to control and input guitars specifically. Of course, it works for all kinds of instruments. bonus of using some MPE controller like a guitar or even the Roli Seaboard is of course that you get this kind of natural imperfections into the music for free. Some sample libraries and some instruments already have these kinds of imperfections built into their instruments. Sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's really not. Sometimes it's even detrimental to the actual playing experience. And as an effect, we need to be extra careful when we look at instruments and libraries that are written specifically for keyboards. If a keyboard player emulates a guitar, he also wants this initial scratch that we get from maybe using our pick to rake over the strings or something like this. For him to get that kind of sound, they must place it in the very beginning of the sound. But any time that I've picked, I don't want to have that sound come as the first reaction to that, because I'm already past that point. So that will be an experience of latency for me. Even if they have the fastest handling of any sample base, I'm still gonna feel like there's a significant latency if the first thing I hear after I've picked the note is the scratching of the strings. I'm treating this a bit differently depending on what library I'm using. Sometimes I'm masking this by introducing another library that doesn't have these scratch sounds on top of each other, so I'm layering sounds to be able to get past the feeling of the scratch being the first sound. But then again, layering sounds has become my go-to MO for creating sounds to begin with. And instead of going for delays and reverbs to fill out the space in between picked sounds, I rather have that filled out with organic sounds from perhaps other instruments. So I really feel I want to preface these coming recommendations of certain instruments over others with this background of maybe having to look at instruments together with their particular controllers as packages, just so we don't think of an instrument in itself as bad. I mean, let's take Native Instruments Mint Stratocaster as an example. It's a great sounding instrument, and I really wanted to try it with my MIDI guitar setup. I'm sure it's great fun for keyboard players to play these choppy lines and stuff. I don't know what they can get out of it, because I've sort of given up on that, because it's, for my type of controller, it's a complete bust. I can't use it. Having said that, let's go on into the first category and let that be the nylon string guitars, for instance. So with this first entry, I'll revisit an old subject of mine. It's the Mike Georgiadis soft nylon guitar. I think it originated via Pianobook and then went on to Spitfire. So if you want it now, it's available from Spitfire Audio. This is, in my humble view, one of the best sounding nylon guitars out there. And I would gladly use it on in all my performances with an acoustic nylon guitar because of the details and the sounds. But there is no bends, and there never was. And for a guitar, I think this is kind of a big thing, especially now as I'm arguing that one of the bigger things for guitars and MPE controllers, the polyphonic bends. I've asked Mike the question himself on a forum here, in which he stated that it was indeed myself who disabled the default pitch bend for soft nylon purely as I thought it sounded bad. I will definitely reactivate it on a future update. The update depends on other factors to make it viable in terms of cost and time. This hasn't happened, and this is sort of the only reason why this isn't my only suggestion for a nylon string guitar. I think this will be one of my absolute favorites, but I seldom come to use it right now just because it doesn't have bends and it robs me of the sensation of actually playing a guitar. Sound-wise, this is absolutely on top. Performance-wise, I just wish for us to be able to use bends with this as well. So the next entry on this list is from the same period, yesteryear that is. It's the MuseSamples, I think it's called Authentic Guitar Evocacion 4. And I almost opted to skip this for this particular video because it has become such a monster in Kontakt. It's almost impossible to set up. You have all these key switches to consider if you want to make it into a polyphonic bend instrument or an MPE instrument in Kontakt. And the way you do that is, of course, you create 6 identical instruments with roughly the same settings and set them to MIDI channels 2 to 7. If you want to do this for this kind of instrument, it sort of takes forever because there are so many adjustments, and we also may have issues with overlaps into the key switches areas, and this is mostly a waste of time if you want to set up. But interestingly enough, Evocacion came out before on Decent Sampler. Nowadays it seems like Decent Sampler have MPE support. I haven't used Decent Sampler in years. I downloaded the last version, loaded this instrument, and it worked with polyphonic bends. This is sort of what we want from an MPE instrument. You get one panel, you get one sort of instrument, one instance to do your settings in. Now granted, this is the previous version of Evocacion, so I don't know if it's even possible for you guys to get it. But I just wanted to mention it for those of you who may already have it. Moreover, if Decent Sampler supports MPE and any of the libraries from Pianobook, for instance, would support MPE, then you have a gold mine to dig from. So just wanted to mention that before I go on to the next instrument. This next entry is quite interesting. It's from the Xperimenta project, and it's a little Italian company that has focused on sort of acoustic instruments. I have their prepared instruments since before, and I'll come back to those. Those are on the absolute top of my list. So this is something that they released, I think it's a month ago. I haven't heard anything about it. I just came across it, and it's fairly cheap. I think it's around 30 bucks or something like this. Well sounding, the perfect amount of settings to go in and fiddle with. It's really responsive, and it actually has these bends too, so you can set it up as a multi and use polyphonic bends. It also has an offset button, so if you want to vary the starting point of the sample, you can use one of the modulators, connect that to this offset button. You get different starting points for the samples all the time. Check out how it sounds in their demos because it's really wonderful. For me, this is the future. I'm talking about physically modeled instruments that I can shape and have do what I want them to, and also they sound really, really nice. I mean, this is Pianoteq. This is their version of the nylon string guitar. In this particular case, I'm in real time tuning it. I'm tuning it as I'm playing, obviously. You can hook up a pedal to one string or one note. If you want to retune one note from your whole fretboard, you can do that. If you want to retune the whole guitar setup, you can do that. And I really hope they're coming out with some additional string instrument as they have with their piano. So imagine if you were to get a whole array of different string instruments, like perhaps mandolins and zithers and gouchens and whatnot. It's a breeze to set up. It works with MPE. It works with retuning protocols like MTS, ESP. You can import tuning files into it. It has settings for practically everything. I've done a lot of videos on this. This is beyond fantastic, of course. So I often get questions about both Ample Sounds and Orange Tree Samples guitars, and both of these are great. This was some 2018 take where I used the Orange Tree Samples Evolution Modern Nylon, and this was obviously way before I could use this as an MPE instrument, but I felt I got it to track at least reasonably well then. And of course, it's way, way better now. And I know that there's some of the critique against these companies are that the dynamics are off in some way, that the presets are always on the loud side. But you know, that's what the settings are for. As guitar players, we can't really depend on using the same patches with the same kind of dynamic profiles as a keyboardist can. You can be way more exact in terms of going from really, really soft dynamics to the loudest dynamics with a key. The range of pressing down a key is way, way, way longer than our softest pick to our hardest pick. If you don't do anything about the dynamics settings on these instruments, you'll get the dynamics that are made for the pianos. And I would absolutely recommend that you narrow the dynamic range if you want to play it with a guitar as opposed to a keyboard. Narrow it to at least something like 80% of the dynamic range for a piano. You can also increase sensitivity, of course, and don't forget to use the dynamics module in MIDI Guitar 3. You have a compressor there, and you also have the tone knob where you can change the dynamic balance for the instrument itself. If your instrument is weak on the higher string, you can sort of tilt the dynamic bias towards the higher end of your guitar, or the lower if you need that. You must remember, we are using guitar. This is completely new rules. You set the rules and you also do the settings. So it's up to you to make this work. So let's stay with the Orange Tree Samples guitars, but segue into the steel string category instead. This is a combination patch. It's two instruments really, Orange Tree Samples Django Jazz, and it's the Ample Sounds Telecaster. I have it's a harmonic swell and I have it on a pedal. So whenever I press the pedal it freezes and I can play over that with my Django Jazz guitar. And this kind of recording is exactly what I want to use to drive home the argument that guitar as a MIDI controller really has its own place. You know, here I can be as wonky as I want to and still get that recorded. Probably not the best recording ever, but it's very much a personal statement if I want it to be. And I couldn't really replicate that if I were to sit and sort of manually input these notes. It would take me weeks to do this. Believe me, I've tried The ice cold Anton Webern Opus 5, I've done that, and there's nothing like this kind of expression in that. That took forever for me to do, altering every sort of value manually. It's really a hassle. So if we want to do some more organic music like jazz or pop or whatever, if we want to do some music with this expression contained in it, I think that's at the heart of the MPE controller. I think that for a guitar player, this is really where MIDI guitar can come in and save the day for us. So. This is almost the same setup. I'm using the Ample Sound Telecaster Swell here, and I'm using an Orange Tree Samples boutique acoustic here instead of the Django Jazz. But I also have a synth in the background. It's the Baby Audio Atoms. You don't think of these as three different instruments. If I need to set some bend ranges, I'll set those on the respective instruments. So everything bends together, everything gels together, and it becomes cohesive units. I have 3 instances of Gig Performer here. So I really have 3 racks to choose from, and I have 5 synths that I'm using in parallel here. And it really doesn't, you really couldn't tell if I didn't tell you. To me, it's one homogeneous sound, and it comes out as one instrument for me. And within this instrument, I think I have 2 different versions of instruments from Orange Tree Samples. And I haven't really used them too much because I was under the mistaken impression that any instrument that you work with in Kontakt is clunky and can't work really well with MPE, or at least with polyphonic bends, because I haven't had any positive experiences with any instrument that actually did. All the instruments that I've tried from Native Instruments or the factory libraries and stuff like this really aren't all that. I mean, you can try them for yourselves. It's really clunky to work with. It's never a smooth experience. Interestingly enough, it's one single instrument that has swayed me. The straight ahead Archtop JB145. This is my absolute favorite among guitars. I haven't had a jazz guitar sound like a jazz guitar until that one. That's the pinnacle of jazz guitars for me. If the loading experience is problematic for you, you might have a problem here. It could probably use some scripting for faster loading. But I mean, once loaded, everything else is forgiven. And that's also the reason for me going back to the Orange Tree samples. So I have straight ahead samples to thank for my newfound interest in instruments in Kontakt, and thus finding the Orange Tree Samples instrument as well, which has been a true joy. So I have a lot of those. The ones I have and know and love are the Django Jazz, of course, the Boutique Acoustic, absolutely. Evolution Steel Strings, also very nice guitar. If you're interested at all in steel string guitars, I would absolutely go to Orange Tree Samples and check those out. If you remember the thing I started with for the soft nylon, Mike Georgiadis has also done a soft acoustic, and that's a steel string, also a beautiful instrument, and it has bends, so thumbs up from me. That works as a polyphonic instrument. Here's a patch where I play both the soft nylon and the soft acoustic at the same time. So this leads into the last category for this video, and this is the basses that I love to work with. It should come as no surprise that this category will be dominated by the ample sound instruments, which I find absolutely lovely to work with when it comes to bass. In this first clip you'll hear me play the Jaco Fretless bass, and after that it's the John Patitucci 6-string bass. I feel a bit ashamed over the fact that I haven't yet recorded anything with my fretless guitar and the fretless bass, which obviously should be the best combination. One interesting thing with the ample sound instruments is they have their own take on this polyphonic bend stuff, and it's not full out MPE, and it really doesn't work fully as an MPE instrument does. And I really love how these instruments sound when I can get them to sound and play like MPE instruments, which I can. My solution is to work with the JB Audio's MPEfy, which is an MPE wrapper, which helps me sort of endowing certain plugins with MPE capabilities. Now, have a listen at this instrument. This is the Ample Sound's upright bass, and this is one of the first instruments I bought from Ample Sound, and it's also one of the ones that I'm coming back to again and again because I really love how it sounds. It's so much detail, and you can leave so much space in whatever you play with it. Here's a little thing I did inside of MIDI Guitar 3. It's one patch, so I'm working on 2 chains in parallel, and I have a looper on the bass as well. Before I leave you today, let me talk about the Xperimenta project mentioned earlier. I talked about the classical guitar. One of my absolute favorites in 2024 is, of course, the Preparato guitar. It's E-bows, you have bowings, you have them struck with different kinds of mallets and metal objects and stuff like this, and all kinds of rattles and weirdness going on. So it's up to you to combine these with, say, other instruments. So if you combine an orange tree sample boutique guitar, which is the most beautiful instrument, together with this, you get something completely new. And it's really weird how much stuff you can get out of, say, combining just two different libraries. This has my warmest recommendations, and I really urge you to take a look at this instrument if you're the least interested in embellishments on traditional guitar sounds. So I'm gonna leave you with a compilation that I did for another video, but it contains almost all of the sounds that I've talked about in this video, so have at it and enjoy.